Welcome, AC Nation, to another presentation of history. Now, last time we actually brought you Connor, who's one of our historians writing for the website that we're designing. If you don't know about that, please, you got to check out our other YouTube videos. This one's going to be huge. It's going to be the most interactive history website ever designed. And yeah, that's a big claim because you have big players out there like the History Channel and so forth and so on. But we have some things that they don't, and we're going to make it so much more exciting to actually visit the site. So, plus, it includes a contest that we're really excited about. It's a contest where you're going to be able to search out history for cash money. So it's like the Create Your Own Card contest. If you're with Historical Conquest, you're going to be able to look through a lot of different parts of history and follow a line of one story, but by going to all these different sites on this website, all these different pages, you'll find different clues that will lead you to the next part of the story and to the next part of the story. So this will be a rabbit hole just full of different stories throughout history based on one starting point. I can't tell you what it's going to be about, but it's coming soon. And that will be part of this website when it's designed. Now, the actual functional website should be out by, mid-October. It's going to be functioning. If you want to be a beta tester, please sign up today. Send it to a general email account. It's general@historicalconquest.com. Send it to us just saying why you want to be a beta tester for this website. Also, at the same time, the functioning part will be out in mid-October, but the actual website will be complete by the end of October. So early Halloween present, Thanksgiving present, a little early, something like that. But it'll be around that area, so we can't wait to share it with you. But today is something very special. This is our presentation of our new podcast. That's right. Jeff Jones, our historian that's been with us for the last 5 years, has joined us today to talk a little bit about the podcast and some of the little the things in history that people have misconceptions about. He's going to set us straight on just some of them, and then the rest of them he's going to set us straight in his podcast. In this podcast, it's going to be the Historical Conquest Podcast. Can't wait to hear it. I've heard the first 2 episodes, and it is fantastic, including music and sound effects, insight that you would not hear from many other places. So stay tuned for that. But until then, Jeff, hey, it's great to hear from you. Sadly, we can't get you on video, but you know what? It happens. How's it going?
I'm doing great, Zach. How are you?
I'm doing great. So, Jeff, tell us about this podcast. Where did you come up with this idea?
Well, what made me think of this podcast is I've been told by several people whenever I attend various historical conquest events is they really enjoy when I take the time to talk about in detail some of the various, people, events, places that we have in the game. And as somebody who thoroughly enjoys history, I like telling the stories as well. And so I figured it would be a good idea to try and just sit down and do a short little podcast talking about various historical events, people, places, things like that, just to give those in the historical conquest world just a little more info, a little something extra that they can enjoy.
Well, what's really interesting is when I first met Jeff, so everyone knows, when I first met Jeff, he had actually just asked if he could help us with anything that we needed when it came to history. Now, a lot of the parents that we were selling the game to for their kids to play, well, a lot of them didn't like the fact that I didn't have a background in history, but I was writing all the cards' history. So Jeff came in and volunteered to rewrite all the cards, to review and edit anything that was that needed to be edited. And so it's really funny because as soon as we started talking, Jeff will talk your ear off. He'll tell you all these great stories. He has so much information just locked up in his head. And this podcast, when he said he wanted to do this, I was like, great, this is a great time to take that information out and give it to everyone. And so podcasting is being one of the best ways of communicating these days between listeners and providers. And so, Jeff, when he gave this idea, I was all over this idea. So, Jeff, what's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have these days from history?
Well, I mean, there's several big misconceptions. Some of the ones I think are more interesting include the invention of the game of baseball. Some people will tell you that it was invented by former Union Army General Abner Doubleday, but actually that's very far from the truth. Another big misconception, one I find particularly I have a connection to, is you've seen people when they go to write down Christmas, they'll write Xmas.
Yeah.
Well, some people, you'll have people say, well, you shouldn't do that because you're taking Christ out of Christmas. But nothing could be further from the truth, because if you were to write out Christ's name in ancient Greek, it actually starts with an X. That's cool. Where that tradition came from.
That's really cool. Okay, so I want to hear about both of those. How about we start off with the first one you gave? Can you give us a little background? Where did baseball actually come from?
Okay. Baseball was actually invented, as we know it, baseball was somewhat invented by a group of students in New Jersey. They based it off of a game that a lot of little kids play back in England. Mm-hmm. Some people call it rounders, some people call it town ball, and it was very similar to that. And they started playing just as a pastime. Well, early 20th century, there was a man by the name of Albert Goodwill Spalding. The guy absolutely loved sports, period, but he particularly enjoyed rounders or town ball.
So wait, is Spalding, like you get a baseball or different sports equipment, it says Spalding on it. Is that the guy?
That's the same guy. That's Albert Goodwill Spalding.
Awesome.
What he did in the early 1900s is he actually sat down and he took the rough kind of vague rules of town ball and he wrote them down in a series of definitive rules. And the rules that he set down are the basis for the game that we call baseball today. So if you wanted an actual father or inventor of what we know as baseball today, that would be Albert Goodwill Spalding.
Now,
and the reason why you see his name on so much sports equipment is because as a businessman, he realized, hey, I can start a company providing people with this equipment to play these games.
So, okay, why do people actually have the misconception of a Union soldier or a Union general creating baseball?
It's actually funny. Probably 1940s-ish. There was a group of basically sports historians, mm-hmm. and they wanted to nail down one person because they wanted to have one person they could point to and say, hey, this is where baseball came from. And it's just one of those things because Albert Goodwill Spalding, most people don't realize the earliest versions of baseball were actually played during the Civil War.
Okay.
And Albert Goodwill Spalding actually played. And so due to doing research, talking to people, somebody came up with the story that, oh, well, I remember seeing Albert Goodwill Spalding playing in the Civil War. And it was just a story that was run with.
No, wait, that Spalding was given the credit, or that the general was?
The general. They said that the general was the one who invented it because they saw him playing it in the Civil War, and it was just one of those stories that people ran with.
Okay, so when you were talking about Spalding, I actually thought of after the Civil War. So Spalding was there during the whole Civil War. Did he actually? Right?
No, Spalding wasn't. The general was. That's my bad.
Yeah.
Spalding actually he was early 20th century, probably 19-teens, 1920s.
Yeah, that's what I first thought. So they just basically looked back into history and said, okay, it probably happened back then, back during the Civil War. Right. But they said, well, it happened back then because
if you talk about just the vague of baseball itself,
Mm-hmm.
the students in New Jersey, they originally started playing back in early 1800s, and town ball, rounders, that whole early version of the game, it has existed here in the U.S. I think as far back as 1840s, 1830s.
Okay, but it was actually rounders and not baseball, and baseball actually came out of rounders around the time of Spalding.
Right. Baseball as we know it was created by Spalding early 1900s.
Okay, now I get it. Yeah.
Rounders was that, and Rounders is actually quite an interesting game, but Rounders was actually changed once it was brought to the U.S., and that changed version turned into a game called Town Ball.
Okay. So now I have to ask, you just mentioned Christmas and it being Xmas. Now that's fascinating, but I wanted to go in order of the ones that you gave. What is that? Why do people get up in arms when you say Xmas? Because I know people have attacked me, don't take Christ out of Christmas. I'm like, I'm not. I'm just shortening the word. Can you tell me a little more about that?
Yes. If you actually go back and you look at, and as we know, Christianity's been around for a very long time.
Yep.
One of the earliest languages that was used in connection with Christianity is ancient Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you look at Christ's name, which in Greek it's pronounced Christos, the first two letters in the name Christos in ancient Greek, the two letters are XP.
Huh.
And so when you take X, which is the first letter, and it's a long-standing tradition in history, whenever you shorten somebody's name, you usually use anywhere between the first to the first three characters of their name,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how you shorten it.
Yeah, J.R.R. Tolkien. Yeah.
Instead of saying Christmas, you're using that X from ancient Greek, Christos, and you're saying Xmas, which is Christos.
Christmas.
It actually translates to Christos Mass, which Mass was the original name given to a Christian religious service.
Yeah. So Merry Christmas, Christos Mass.
Christos Mass.
That's awesome. So yeah, another thing I did not know, and that really helps, especially if I ever write Xmas on accident and somebody brings it up, then I say, hey, let me tell you some history. This is why it's so great to know history. You automatically become like the smartest man in the room. So that's really cool. Okay, so now I have another question for you.
Yeah.
What other things do we have in normal society that people have misconceptions of that we really need to get cleared up? Such as
probably another good example. Everyone knows that our national symbol or our national emblem is the bald eagle.
Uh-huh. It's supposed to be a turkey, right?
And that's what I was getting at.
Oops.
Most people will tell you that the turkey was almost our national emblem.
Yeah,
and while yes, turkey was one of the symbols that they were considering, when it came down to the final vote, the bald eagle beat out one other animal just by a handful of votes. That other animal was the rattlesnake.
Almost like a... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, the reason why is because a lot of our founders, their foreign policy, for lack of a better phrase, they said was very similar to that of the rattlesnake, in that as long as you don't mess with me, I won't mess with you. That's how rattlesnakes are. You see them, they're not going to come after you. But if you go mess with them, you step on them, that's when they retaliate. Mm-hmm. That's the way our founders felt. They felt we as a nation, we're not going to mess with anybody else. We know we're a young nation. We're still trying to make it. As long as you don't mess with us, we won't mess with you. And that's why the rattlesnake was almost our national emblem.
See, and that makes complete sense because back when, right after the American Revolution, we went after the pirates, and I can't remember their name, but the pirates that basically ransacked us. And I'm not saying Caribbean, I'm saying like African pirates. It's funny that they're still around even to these days.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit what were the pirates? Can't remember their name.
Well, I believe what you're referring to are what's known as the Barbary Pirates.
That's the one. Yes.
The Barbary Pirates, they saw the U.S. as a young country, saw them as an easy target, and figured, okay, we'll kind of pick on them. We'll, steal some of their ships, steal some of their crew members. We'll force them to pay money to get them back, things like that.
So much like it's happening today with Somali pirates and such.
Exactly. And it was actually our third president who essentially said, okay, I'm done with dealing with this. And he started hiring people, well-known, naval figures. He basically hired them to go out and to, retaliate against the pirates. He also hired them to take a brand new form of military force, later called the Marines, and he basically took the fight to the Barbary Pirates.
And where was
he hired them to take these Marines over to the Barbary Pirates countries, fight them there, because his theory was, if all the destruction is over there, our people are safe. And that is where you get the famous line from the U.S. Marine Corps battle hymn, from the halls of Montezuma to the shores of Tripoli. The shores of Tripoli were where we sent the Marines to battle the Barbary Pirates and basically try to teach them a lesson, tell them, don't mess with us.
And remind some of our viewers that don't know, where is Tripoli?
Tripoli is over on the northern coast of Africa.
Okay. So like Libya, that type of area?
Right.
Yeah. Well, so it's really exciting to hear all the different kinds of misconceptions that we have in America especially, but I mean, of course, all over the world, they all have misconceptions. Some places are taught differently here or in England. Jeff, do you have any examples of those? Something that we're taught one thing while someone else is taught something else in another country? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, I mean, there's a whole number of examples you could use there. I mean, in most countries throughout the world, we are taught that, the citizens are taught, your job is to be a citizen, and the government has all the power, so they take care of you. Whereas we in the U.S., our founders, they fought a war of independence to get out from under that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why when they wrote the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, they wrote it essentially as what many historians refer to as a bill of negative liberties.
Yeah.
It's not so much the government has to do this for you, as it's more of a, hey, we know the government can get out of hand, so these are the things, namely the Bill of Rights, that the government cannot do.
And don't you go into that with one of the first few podcasts?
I think I do mention that in the first one, which I believe is everybody's familiar with the Second Continental Congress, because that's what produced the Constitution. Well, I do a podcast for the First Continental Congress. The First Continental Congress is where our founders actually laid the groundwork for what would become the Second Continental Congress and eventually the Constitution.
Yeah, and for all those that have played the American Revolution version of Historical Conquest, you'll know what the first Constitution is, because that's a really important card.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's great. Okay. So talking about putting you on the spot, I wanted to ask you a little question. I'm going to actually give you two choices because I don't want to put you too much on the spot. But as I was saying, we're trying to pull all this information from Jeff's head and put it on a podcast. So let's see what he knows about one of two figures. I'm just going to ask him two. One is Jack the Ripper. The other one is, let me put it this way. Okay, just one of the cards from the game. Hyrum Rhodes Revels. Jeff, which one do you want to talk about?
Okay, well, there's both two very, very interesting and very different figures. I think I'll lean towards Hyrum Rhodes Rebel.
Okay.
Hyrum Rhodes Rebel is a very fascinating figure. This is a guy who was originally born as a slave, and he was very very passionate. He was extremely intelligent. Much of what he knew in his life was self-taught. And he eventually ended up moving on to, after the Civil War, he was one of the first two African Americans to be members of U.S. Congress.
So you said that he was self-taught. So you're saying we don't have to go to public schools? Maybe he'd be homeschooled?
Well, I mean,
yeah, get that.
You can take that however you want, but all I can say is the Department of Education didn't come around until 1979.
There you go. Okay, sorry. Didn't mean to interrupt.
And Hyrum Rhodes Rebel, he was, as I said, he's one of the first two African Americans to be members of the U.S. Congress.
Mm-hmm.
He actually entered Congress in 1870. That is only 5 years after the end of the Civil War.
So just to remind everyone, that's way before segregation. That's way before segregation.
Very, very, very far from segregation.
Yeah.
And he was a U.S. Senator in 1870 to represent the state of Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fascinating with him because in 1870, this is prior to the advent or the ratification of the, I believe it was the 17th Amendment.
Mm-hmm.
The 17th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution stated that U.S. senators would be directly elected by the people. Well, prior to that, senators were actually selected by the individual states' combined House of Representatives and Senate.
So this was a selection process, not an election process.
Correct. And so the people of the Mississippi State House of Representatives and the Mississippi State Senate thought so highly of him, they selected him to represent the state of Mississippi in Washington, D.C.
And see, this is the funny thing because, and I mean no offense to anybody in Mississippi because this is a total misconception, talking about misconceptions here.
Right.
But I would swear that the first person from, first African American to be brought on to Congress would be someone in the North, and not from a state that basically people thought was racist because of segregation. Of course, it was way before.
Yeah, absolutely. And another individual that I always like when Hyrum Rhodes Rebel comes up, another individual that I like to bring up is actually from the state I currently live in and call home, South Carolina.
Okay.
And that's a man by the name of Joseph Hayne Rainey.
Which we do have a card on, too. Sorry.
I'm sorry?
I said which we do have a card on as well in the game.
Yes, we do. And Joseph Hayne Rainey, again, he's African American, was originally born a slave, self-educated, and the same year that Rebel was selected as U.S. Senator, Joseph Hayne Rainey was actually elected as the first African American member of the U.S. House of Representatives.
So elected by the people.
By the people.
See, that's amazing. Both southern states.
Yes.
So it's really the story I love to tell is about Wentworth Chaswall, who was right after the American Revolution was elected to so many different offices as an African American elected official.
Yes.
So it's funny because you don't think of that. A lot of people like to talk about America being racist and having all these big issues. Well, coming back from the origin, back when things were, according to us, simpler, we actually had elected African Americans. Go figure.
Absolutely.
So what were some of the other elected officials? I know there's very few, but other African American elected officials, such as like Obama. Where was he in the number of elected officials?
Well, and as I said, Joseph Hayne Rainey was the first African American selected to be in the U.S. Senate. That was 1870.
Yep.
Well, it's interesting because we talked, because with the upcoming election, everything talks about political parties. Well, he was a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other major party, especially what we hear in the news now, is the Democratic Party.
Yeah.
Well, the Democratic Party, as I said, Joseph Hayne Rainey, 1870, U.S. Senate. That was first African American Republican. The first African American Democrat elected to the U.S. Senate, believe it or not, Zach, was actually in your lifetime.
Whoa! After segregation. That's a big jump.
That's the first African American Democrat elected to the U.S. Senate was a woman by the name of Carol Moseley Braun for the state of Illinois in 1993.
That's amazing.
That is over 120 years later.
It's so sad. It's so sad that it took that long.
Well, and you mentioned former President Obama. He was actually only the second African-American Democrat elected to the U.S. Senate.
Holy cow. So, yeah, and they're both from Illinois, which is interesting. Again,
exactly.
It's like the separation between like northern states and southern states, and yet they started off in the South.
Right.
That's awesome. I know there's a lot of, like, we have a few Hispanic as well, ones that came from Mexico and South America, that became governors and things like that, but not till later on. It is so great to actually hear that during the, like right after the American Revolution, we had Wentworth Chaswall. After the Civil War, we had multiple African Americans being elected. This is not a racist state, and anybody that says it needs to learn some history. Holy cow. I'm glad you picked Hyrum Road's Rebels to clarify. At some point, I'd love to hear about Jack the Ripper, because I have no idea, but everyone knows him. Don't worry about it now, though. I mean, we've already used up a lot of your time. Hey, Jeff, I really appreciate the time that you were able to put towards this, and I can't wait to hear your podcast. Again, it's basically Jeff with music and with sound effects, so that's also a great little thing as well. Jeff, do you have any other misconceptions or anything else that we need to know about history that no one really talks about? Sorry, again, putting you on the spot. You don't have to answer. So
that's it. Well, that's okay. I mean, the only other probably big misconceptions is probably that many people think that Christianity was something that as far as like world leaders and emperors and things like that, it was not something that occurred until several hundred years after Christ. Mm-hmm. But that's not true, because one of the more iconic figures in history is Alexander the Great.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, not Alexander the Great.
Okay.
Constantine.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Constantine.
Emperor Constantine. He very much said, especially towards the end of his life, he was very much Christian. Mm-hmm. And another one of my personal favorite figures in history is Charlemagne.
Yeah.
Charlemagne was the first world leader to actually commit military forces to defend Christianity.
So that's really interesting. I don't like the name drop, but Charlemagne is actually my great. I could probably go 20 times. I don't know. Great grandfather. So he's a direct line from me. So hey, genealogy works here. So, Chef, again, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I can't wait to hear your podcast. Everyone else, stand by. They're going to be coming out fairly soon, and yeah, we got so much more. And in these, Jeff will actually prepare. He won't be put on the spot. He'll actually prepare parts of history to tell you all the ins and outs, all the details of what was going on, so that you can actually hear and be part of the experience. So again, Jeff, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Hey, we'll talk to you soon. Take care.
You too. Bye.
And for everyone else, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday presentation. Can't wait to see you next week. Check us out on our Monday review and also Tutorial Tuesday. If you haven't seen those, you got to see them. We have a whole new Facebook group just made for critiquing and reviewing all the cards. Slowly but surely. Thank you so much. We'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye. If you have any comments or questions, add them to the comments below. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow, actually. Take care. Bye.